talk about Webpack today. This is me. My name is Jonathan Creamer. This is our new house we're building up in Nashville, Tennessee. How many have been to Nashville? Wow, holy smokes, a lot of people. So I live just south of Nashville in a town called Franklin. I currently work at Lonely Planet. How many people have heard of Lonely Planet? This is great. This is wonderful. So you guys know what we do, but for those of you who don't, we're a travel company. It's a cool brand. We've been around since like the 70s, helping people figure out where to go in the world, what to do. It's a really fun place to be. I'm a senior front-end developer there, but I kind of do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Lately, we're all into React and Express and Webpack and front-end tooling, but then I've also been getting into like Docker and Kubernetes and DevOps. So it's been kind of a fun ride at Lonely Planet, getting to do all kinds of fun things that I wouldn't normally have gotten to do. I tweet a lot at jcramer898. I love to chat with you guys. Love talking, getting to know people in the community. Currently a Microsoft Visual Studio MVP, so that's always really fun. And I also like to blog a lot at jonathancreamer.com. So that is me. So first I want to ask, how many people already kind of have been using Webpack? So just a handful. Good. That's not a bad thing. We're going to kind of talk a little bit about what it is first, and then get it kind of a little bit more advanced. It's not super advanced, but it's got we've got some cool techniques that we'll talk about. How about Gulp or Grunt? Anybody using those? Cool. JSPM, Aurelia, the Aurelia guy here, he uses it. Well, cool. Well, Webpack is a little bit kind of like a Grunt type tool. It does some of the same kind of things you can do with Grunt and Gulp, but it's a little bit different in the way that it approaches assets. So rather like with Gulp and CSS, it's very task-based, whereas with Webpack, it's meant to kind of bundle every single type of static asset that you could possibly want to bundle. So you can actually add like things like images and fonts along with your CSS and your JavaScript into your bundles, which seems very strange at first. You might be like, I don't really understand what that means, but we'll get into it in a minute. But what's really cool about it also is that out of the box, it supports certain module syntaxes like CommonJS and AMD, which is really nice as a front-end developer, because then you can start doing the whole sharing code between the front-end and the back-end thing if you're doing Node. Whereas instead of relying on window globals, you can use CommonJS and AMD. So really nice features to have. It operates around two concepts, one called loaders and one called plugins. Loaders basically are you use your modules, and based on the file extension of your modules, you do something with that module. So if it ends in a JS, you might use Babel, or if it ends in a TS, you might use the TypeScript loader, or if it's a CSS file, you'll use either Sas Loader or whatever. You could use Stylus, any of those things. But it basically, depending on your file type, you'll go through a different loader. And you can configure it with query string parameters, all kinds of cool things. And then it has a lot of plugins. Vast ecosystem. There's so many different kinds of plugins now. Thousands of people using this thing. I think it kind of got started at Instagram, which I'll kind of show earlier, or in a little bit here. But yeah, it's gotten to be a really big community, and it's really fun to be a part of. But it's a tough thing to come into. My friend Jim at LeanKit kind of was the first person to introduce me to it, and when I saw it, I was like, "This is weird, man. What the heck is a loader and a Commons chunk plugin? What does that even mean?" So getting into it is a little bit tough, but that's kind of why I'm here, to help kind of take away some of the complexity of it for you, because once you really get into it, you'll find that it does some things that you didn't think were possible very easily. So as a kind of basic, this is how you get started with it. The first thing you want to do is create a webpack.config.js file. But even still, this is what I'm talking about with this API. Like, what the heck is an entry? Well, in Webpack, you have to say, I want to choose one file that is going to be kind of the starting place for where I'm going to load all my modules from. So that's the entry. I want to output my bundle to the dist folder with the file name of index. And this is the loaders I was talking about. So the way that the loaders work is I say any file that I load in that has a .js on the end of it, I want to pass it through the Babel loader. And the way you configure it is with this like funky query string parameter looking thing. And how many people have been using Babel by any chance? So a few people. So you guys may have seen this then. This is the ES15 preset for Babel. So that's how you configure it. So then you just got to install a few things and run Webpack progress. So this is a really, really basic way to get started with it. So if you've never done Webpack before, you could just easily be writing the latest and greatest of ES 2015 with Babel with just a few lines of code. So that's really nice. Boom, you're good to go. So that's kind of the most basic thing you can do. And this is what it looks like when you run Webpack -- progress. You get this nice output. It tells you the size of every little chunk you have. This is actually like real output from our Webpack config at work. So I've got a bunch of different entries like this: countries, cities, continents. Those are all my entry chunks. And they have names over here on the side. We'll talk more about these in a minute. But the first thing I want to kind of get more into the sort of advanced part of with is, if you'll notice down here, it says that by default when you do this, especially if you're working with a big thing like we have a lot of code we've written now, it says 802 hidden modules. Well, they're kind of hidden by default, but if you're getting into doing some debugging, one thing you might want to do is see exactly all the bundles or all the modules that went into certain bundles. So you can do that by adding display-modules onto your CLI. So I've got that up here now, and now it shows me exactly all the things, even down into my node modules directory, that I'm including. So that way I get really nice insight into everything that I've put into my bundles. Then you can also add the display reasons flag, and that'll tell you exactly what lines of code required which modules, which is really nice. So there's times when you might want to figure out like, oh crap, where the heck does moment.js, where did I use moment.js, I forget. Well, you can just use this and figure out exactly where you required moment.js, so it's really nice. There's another option called display chunks that goes even one step farther down. There's a concept of dynamic chunks we'll get to in a little while. So you can also do that. It allows you to split up your code and have all these chunks that are separate than entries. This is what I'm saying. It's chunks, entries, and we'll get all there. You can also, if you're wanting to just do like a kind of a one-off thing on the command line, what's kind of cool, they have the CLI mapped to the Webpack config options. So if you were to add output and library target into your Webpack config, well, you can also test just that one config via the CLI, which is kind of nice. So any option that you could put into your Webpack config, you can map to like -- whatever, and you can kind of change it on the command line, which is just a nice little tip. If you're wanting to just do a quick debug build of your Webpack config, you can run -d, and that will turn on debug mode. It'll add a source map to your output and give you a little bit more info about what happened. So that's really nice if you just don't want to have to go in and update your Webpack config. If you just want to do Webpack -d, that's your development one. Probably one of the best parts of Webpack is the --watch, because you don't want to sit there and run Webpack over and over and over again as you're changing your assets. You can just run Webpack --watch, and as you're writing ES 2015 code with the config I had before, it'll be constantly updating and recompiling your ES 2015 down to ES5, which is really nice. That's one of my favorite features of it. And then when you get ready to deploy, you can do Webpack -p, and that does optimize, minimize, and optimize occurrence order. Basically just runs it through Uglify and concatenates it and minifies it into a nice distributable bundle that you can throw out onto your server. Another really, really cool feature of Webpack, aside from just the watch, is they have this concept of a Webpack dev server. And it's a separate package that you run, but rather than only compiling your assets, what you can do is this thing runs like a little tiny express server. You can run it inside the root of your project and host that directory. So if you've got like index.html in there and you've got your kind of path to wherever your dist folder is, inside that index.html, you can reference your dist and just host that little site with that Webpack dev server. And what it does, not only does it compile everything as you change it, like it does with the watch, but it also throws out WebSockets so that every time that you change a file, it refreshes the browser for you. So you get that nice live reload thing. So there's actually two different ways you can run Webpack dev server. One is as a separate kind of CLI here. You can create a tab in terminal and run Webpack dev server like this with progress. If you want to have the cool hot reloading thing where it refreshes the browser, you just pass --hot and --inline. Don't worry about what that means. It's weird, but that's how you do it. And then you may also have to go in and add a public path to where your JavaScript file's output lives. So if you're in dist, you may want to do dist or whatever, but this ends up being where you would say script source equals assets index.js or whatever. I'll show you a demo of this later. So it's really nice. And the other way you can do it is actually as a middleware. There's a Webpack dev middleware if you're already doing Node that you can import. And then as you run Express, or I'm sure there's one for like Happy.js and all those other ones, but so we use it for our Express server. So we just start up Express, and then it also starts up Webpack at the same time. So they're running in a single process, and everything's really nice. So it's super, super fine and fun for development, especially with React, because they have this package called Webpack or React Hot that does not only does it change your code and compile your JSX, but it actually doesn't even refresh the browser. It just shoots up a new JavaScript file into the browser and reloads just that single module with React. So the page literally never refreshes. It's absolutely incredible to watch. You can change like CSS, and if you're using inline CSS and this page just updates like this, it makes development so much faster. You can do like double the work in a day because you're not waiting, especially if you have like API calls you're making. So every time you hit the server, you're waiting on your API. So with the React Hot, it's amazingly fun to work with. So one thing that I end up doing a lot, because of all the different ways and configurations that you can use Webpack, how many people know that like you can kind of put scripts in package.json? Do you know this? Okay, some people do. If you don't, in package.json, you can add a scripts key and give a key value set of like commands that you can run that just alias out certain things. So this kind of ends up being almost like your grunt replacement. So rather than just or gulp, rather than defining all these tasks, you can just write these scripts. So I can run npm run watch, and this will spin up my Webpack dev server. So you can break them up. I mean, in our package.json and one of our applications, there's like 20 scripts. But some scripts you can call other scripts. So you could have like one that builds for the server, one that builds for debug, one that does CI, one that does unit testing. So it's really nice. So you can kind of keep everything that you want. It kind of becomes self-documenting too, because if you're coming in as a new developer and you don't know what all you can do, you can just look in the scripts and see, oh, okay, this is how I start the server. This is how I run debug mode. This is how I do whatever. So that's a really cool thing you can do. One of my favorite little debugging tools that they have in the Webpack community is called the Analyze tool. And John Galloway mentioned this yesterday, but this is one of the coolest freaking things you can do. Put this over. Why is it not going? There it is. So when you're, you can run Webpack with a flag called --profile and then --JSON, and then output it to a JSON file, and it gives you this huge JSON file that gives you details about your application. So this is just from a small little thing that we're doing right now, but it's pretty cool because it shows you how everything kind of maps up. So I've stop.js, I've got all these different files that kind of shows you how they link together. You can imagine as you get a bigger application, this becomes extremely handy dandy. And if you happen to have any JS hinting errors or anything like this, they show up under errors, which I don't have any right now, thankfully. It's pretty cool. Also, it gives you a few tips about which of course there's only like 4 modules in this example, so it's a little arbitrary, but if you have like hundreds of modules that you're loading, it'll say you're loading like 17 things in a row. If you were to pre-fetch like this one in the middle, it would cut down your build time by this much. So it's pretty useful. It gives you really good information that you wouldn't know otherwise. So, what's funny about this though is it's just kind of buried inside the Webpack documentation. I just happened to stumble upon it one day. So really useful tool. It's Webpack GitHub.io Analyze. So it's really useful. So yeah, that's what our Webpack build looks like for our Lonely Planet homepage. It's freaking insane. To be honest, it's like super hard to parse. But yeah, the command line for this is very funky. Actually, that's only supposed to be 1 caret there. I think it'll still work, but anyway. So yeah, the Webpack Analyze tool is another fantastic debugging tool you can use. So I want to talk about multiple entry bundling with Webpack. So you saw before where I just had the one single app, which is useful if you're doing like a single page application or something small. But none of us really do that in real life, right? We have a lot more going on than just, unless you're lucky enough to be on a single page application. But That doesn't always happen. But even if you are in a single page application, you still might want to split up how you bundle things. So kind of in my experience, one of the hardest things that I've been had to figure out all the time, and it's a problem I always come back to, is like, if I'm working in a multiple page application, how do I tell each page that I only want this page to have this set of assets and this other page to have this set of assets? Like, how do you do that? People figured it out with Grunt, with some kind of hacky things, but a lot of times people end up just putting all the things in one bundle and shipping it down, particularly with CSS. You'll just use Sas and you'll take all your CSS and put it in one CSS file and ship it down to the client. It's fine, it works, because then the browser caches it and you're good to go, so that's kind of cool. But I just have never really liked that solution. I've always wished there was a better way to do it. And talk about even like common things, like if I know I need jQuery, I want that loaded on every page. But on my home page, for example, like I don't want my common.js huge bundle on my home page, because I want that to be like as fast as possible, right? So I've always wished there was a way to say, on my home page, I need a few common things like jQuery or Moment or whatever. But on like my About page or my Contact Us page or my admin page, I want to have separate things. I want to have only the code necessary for that page. So that's never been something that's like super duper easy to do until Webpack. So check this out. This is so awesome. So what you can do is you can have multiple entries now. Instead of just passing an array, you can have an object that says, I want to have a common entry chunk. That's what that means, entry chunk, common entry chunk. And I want to preload that common chunk with jQuery, because I know that I'm going to have jQuery on every page. Stop the hating on jQuery. You know you're going to use it. It's OK. So jQuery is going to be on every page. But then I have, at Lonely Planet, we have broken up how we deliver our pages into 3 concepts: countries, continents, and cities. So each one of those has their own entry point, because each one of them loads slightly different assets than the rest of them. Our cities page in particular has some extra components that the countries and continents don't have, like a hotels widget and a few other things. So I wanted to break those out into multiple chunks. And then I also have a polyfill chunk. So I could just preload it with Babel polyfill if I wanted to, and then load that in when I need to. So that's a really nice advantage as well. Then what you have to do is you have to kind of just slightly adjust your output. I want it to go to public JavaScripts here. And then you have to use this kind of funky looking square bracket name JS thing. There's 3 different ways you can, 3 different things you can use in that. It's kind of like a template. So what ends up happening is you end up getting a common JS, a continents JS, countries, cities, and polyfill JS. That's all that means. So basically for each key in your entry, you'll get it'll spit out a file like that. And then for the chunks, which we'll talk about the dynamic chunks in a minute, it'll actually add the chunk hash onto the end of the file name. Those get loaded asynchronously after the page loads, and so you kind of want to have them look slightly different so you know what they are being dynamically put in. And then you can set your public path just like you did, like I showed you before. So that's how you can kind of split it up. It's really nice. But then on top of this, there's another cool concept you can use, and this is what I was saying with kind of the weird API. There's this thing, you go webpack.optimize.commons chunk plugin. I was just like, can you not have come up with a better name for this thing? Like, what does this thing do? Commons chunk, I have no idea. So what you can do with it is in your Webpack, you have to require Webpack inside your Webpack config. It's kind of meta. But you say require Webpack, and then on Webpack, there's an optimize object that has all these different plugins for optimizations. And one of them is this one. So what you do is you can preload your common chunk with whatever you need it to have in it, and you can create a new instance of this plugin and pass it the name common. So these 2 things have to line up. If they don't line up, it'll blow up. Learn that from experience. And then you can say min chunks, and what this is, anytime that you end up using a module, in this case 2 or more times, it's going to take that module out of one of your entry chunks and put it into the common chunk. So for example, I have cities, continents, countries, and like regions and neighborhoods. So, but I'm only saying 2 here. But if I have Moment.js, or if I have jQuery slider, or something that I happen to use in 2 of those entry chunks, like maybe my cities and my regions need it, then Webpack is somehow smart enough to figure out, all right, well, we don't need to like put that in both the cities and the countries JS output. Let's take it out of both of those and put it over here in the common. So that's exactly what I was talking about. It's like now, if something is common across multiple pages, it's automatically moved over into common. Otherwise, it stays on the page that it is needed.
So let's say, let's take jQuery. So let's say that jQuery is required on 2 of your 5 chunks.
Mm-hmm.
So then they'll be moved out to common.
Mm-hmm.
jQuery is going to be available on all 5?
Yes.
Is that what you want?
Well, for 2 I only have like 3 pages, so in this case, it's
like
fine.
For
but
example, like you want your home page to be fast as possible. It seems like that would actually go against that principle.
well, for something that's like super common like jQuery, you just know it's going to be there, and so you can then you can go in and if you end up finding that your home page chunk is getting too big, with that analyze tool, you could go back in and say, okay, I need to figure out why this is being included in so many pages, and then maybe just start putting it only in those bundles and making sure, because you can do that too.
Don't you have to reference? I was going to say, don't you have to still reference both of those chunks in your page? So I don't see what the advantage of putting the min chunks thing there is, because you know you're going to have to reference them anyway.
If you don't do min chunks, it defaults to infinity, which means you have to manually put things in your common chunk plugin, in the commons chunk. It's kind of weird the way it works. If you don't put a min chunks, it defaults to literally the word infinity. So you have to only put things in with this array. It's kind of strange. I don't know why. This is the way it is. So
it seemed like the default should be 2, right?
I know it does, doesn't it? It seems like 2 or more, but the default is not. The default is infinity, because there's that's a reserved word. It kind of makes, I don't know, it's weird, but again, the whole thing's kind of weird sometimes. So yeah, that's that's exactly what I've been trying to accomplish for all this time, and now it's like super easy to do. So now let's talk about CSS on Webpack. So this is where things get like really crazy. So we talked about JavaScript already, but what you can also do, check this craziness out. So if I'm in my header component, first of all, what I've tried to do going forward every time I write a new project is I try to break everything out now into like folders of code that contain only the code for that module, right? So I have a source components header, and inside that header folder is everything that I need for my header, period. Maybe even tests, CSS, images, whatever I need lives there. So if I'm importing a navigation JS from inside there, that happens here. But then check this out. I'm actually requiring CSS, or actually even SCSS inside of a JavaScript file. And you may be like, what in the world is that all about? Well, like I said before, what Webpack does is it tests based on a file extension. So when I say require header SCSS, what it's going to do is it's going to take that CSS file and run it through 3 different loaders. And these 3 different loaders are the Sas Loader, which the Sas Loader uses Node Sas, not the Ruby Sas. So Node Sas is actually built in C++ and it's extremely fast, way faster than the Ruby one. So that runs it through and compiles it down into CSS, and then the CSS loader takes the output and passes it to something called the style loader. And the style loader is an interesting beast that I'll show you kind of a screenshot of what it does in a minute, but it basically inlines the CSS on the page. It's a really cool concept. But it's kind of freaky because the first time you see it, you're like, requiring my CSS inside JavaScript. What? Are you serious? That's so wrong. But check it out. So this is Instagram. This is kind of one of the pioneers for this concept. So what they do is, look at all this inline CSS. It's sort of weird, right? But it's a single page application. So they have control over how things load and when things load. And so this is actually very, very fast and efficient. Rather than downloading a big, 700 kK CSS file, they've got all these little inline CSS things that just go really, really fast because the browser parses those instantly. So that's what the style loader does. And there's a guy, his name is Pete Hunt, that gave the kind of talk on this concept originally. So I'd check that out if you're really interested. The style loader. It's really cool. Yeah, it's really, really fast. But there are some caveats to it. So if you're trying to do it and you're not doing a single page application, you have to do a little bit of workarounds, because what will happen is you'll expect that your CSS is going to be pretty, and you have this flash of unstyled content because all of a sudden, right? It's just so true. I hate CSS so much. Rather than having your CSS in a link tag, it's actually being processed by JavaScript. And so that can cause a flash of unstyled content. And so that's kind of weird. So there's actually a way around that too, though. There's another really cool plugin called Extract Text plugin. And what this guy does, you just install it with Webpack, and you configure it like this. Required in, syntax is fairly strange, but you kind of replace what you did before and do extract text plugin dot extract. And so now what happens is it passes through the loader is pretty much the same way, except you'll notice that there's a comma here. So the comma says I want everything to wind up in the style loader, and then I'm going to chain a bunch of module loaders together here. So what this ends up doing, anytime you require a Sas file in this case, it's actually going to take the content that it rendered out and put it into a CSS file. So that's really cool too, because now not only are we doing, because the stuff I talked about before with the min chunks and the common whatevers, that ends up happening with your CSS files now too with this plugin. So you'll actually get a common.css file and then a continent CSS and a country CSS. So the CSS that is only for those individual files. So I mean, there's trade-offs. Obviously, like you said, you may have some issues like that. But in general, this pattern ends up lending itself to some pretty awesome things. I love working with it. But one of the things that I've been able to accomplish at Lonely Planet, who knows what critical CSS, have you heard of this concept, critical CSS? Oh, wow, cool. So the idea of critical CSS is you want to show something to your users as fast as possible, right? Because you want to get that page load less than 2 seconds, so that way your Google scores, your Google foods go up. So you want to deliver something to the page as fast as you can. There's a tool called Webpagetest that can really help debug issues, and even the Chrome Developer Tools has something about it now. So that's the concept of above the fold, right? That's the above the fold, and there's below the fold. So above the fold is you want something to happen as quickly as possible. So Scott Gell was kind of one of the guys. If you've never heard of Scott, he's a really, really smart front-end developer. Wrote a book on responsive design. Sorry, it's hard to say. Really cool guy. So he kind of helped teach me some of this stuff. You can use code splitting with Webpack to achieve this thing called critical CSS. So for example, if this is my above the fold, what the users see when they first land on the page, what I want to do as a front-end developer is make sure that this stuff loads as quickly as humanly possible to get that all in before that 2-second page load, so that people at least feel, like perceive that the page loads really fast. Doesn't matter like at a technical level if there's still things going on below there, but the stuff above the page that they see when they get there, you want that to be as quick as you can, right? So what I've done is you kind of want to try to see that the above the fold stuff is rendered. In my case, we got it down to where it's like at 728 milliseconds, something's happening. At one second, the page is almost fully, and actually at this point, all we're waiting on is an image. So this is actually a tool built into the Chrome Developer Tools. How many people, did you guys know this is here already? Have you seen this? This is a super nice tool, just built into the Chrome Developer Tools now. So that's what you want to achieve right there. And one of the ways that you can do that is you can use this concept of dynamic chunks in Webpack. And what that means, you can actually choose points in your code to split and say, all right, I want these few things to load immediately, and then I'm going to create a chunk that loads asynchronously after the page loads. It's very cool. So this is what it looks like. And you use require and require.ensure to achieve this. So for us, I knew exactly what modules were above the fold because I have everything broken out into the source components directories, header, navigation, the masthead, whatever. I knew exactly what components were above there. So in each one of my entry chunks, I said, well, I know I need my masthead, I know I need Reso, and then I have this /main, which loads a few other things like my navigation, my header, analytics, ads, whatever that I know needs to be up there. So then I do this weird looking thing where you say require.ensure, and then I give it an array of things that I want to load below the fold. And this below the fold, I actually have a file called below the fold. And then inside there is where I load all the things that I know are below there. So we have like a lot of components below the page, map and hotels widget and all these different things. So I have all my stuff above the fold gets put into cities, and then you can actually give this chunk, this dynamic chunk, a name. So I call it below the fold. That way in my output, I can actually see that I got my cities.js, and it has 1.15K, and then my below the fold. My below the fold, see, it's actually quite a lot bigger, 91K, because it's a lot more stuff that's below the page. So that's exactly what you want to try to accomplish, so that way your stuff above the page loads as quickly as you can. So you can have many chunks inside of chunks. You can go as deep as you want, actually, and have chunkception. So that's a really nice, actually, I'll show you this just real quick. Pardon the ad. Should probably turn ad block on here. I'll show you this. This is pretty cool. So this is the Asia highlights page. So I don't know if you saw that little flashy flash. So that little fade in is my below the fold code loading in. But you can see that as soon as the page loads, that stuff above the fold is there immediately. Yay! So that took me forever, by the way, to figure that out. But it was so worth it. Because when I saw my Google page scores come in, I was like, yeah, done. Awesome. So that's what you can achieve with dynamic code chunking in Webpack. So yeah, let me close that out.
Question.
Yes?
So in that case, again, I'm not trying to be very clear.
Nope.
So why not do the first, if you're above the fold stuff, and just standard HTML? So there's no reactive components that at least that I saw on that page.
There are, well that also includes the CSS. So it extracts the CSS that it needs for above the fold too. So all my navigation CSS, my header CSS, my masthead CSS, and actually that page that you kind of saw that slide, well, whatever. There is some JavaScript there too. The masthead has a slideshow. The search feature is up top where you click on it and it shows search thing. So there was code there too. But the CSS, that's the coolest part to me is the CSS that it pulls out, because only the CSS for the header loads immediately. And then some other global things, but yeah. Okay. Back here. So let's move on from that. Talk about something called build targets, another Webpacky thing. So how many people use AMD? Wow, one person. Okay, so AMD is another way to load modules. It actually became really popular because it eliminated globals in a time when that was kind of what we were trying to achieve, is figuring out how to not have globals and have JavaScript modules. So a lot of people still may be using AMD modules, and then we come across Webpack and they're like, I want to use Webpack, how do I do it? Well, believe it or not, Webpack actually supports both Node style modules, the common JS, the module that exports stuff, as well as AMD out of the box. Not only can it read the modules in, but it also knows how to output them. So if for some reason, like when we first started down this road, we were actually thinking we were going to have to stick with AMD. We didn't end up, but I thought we were. So what I was doing was I wanted to kind of write new code and shove it into our existing AMD infrastructure. So that was possible because Webpack also allows you to do that, which is really neat. You can have a bundle that takes all of your code and puts it in as an AMD module, so you can actually use it in a legacy AMD system. It's pretty cool. You can also actually target Node, which is sort of strange. You might think, why would you want to do that? Well, for one thing, Node is moving quickly, right? We're up to 4 is the LTS and 6 is the stable. So it's moving really fast, but there's still certain things that is not supported in Node, just like natively. So like things, even Es6 modules, like I love Es6 modules. It's like the cleanest way to write JavaScript in my opinion. It's so much fun. You can statically analyze them. There's lots of cool things you can do with Es6 modules, but there's like this dispute in the community of like, how do we handle Es6 modules in Node? Because Node's got this common JS stuff, and it's pretty complicated to try to figure out like which modules are Es6 modules or which ones are common JS modules. So there was literally even talk about them having to like name the file extension .common.js or something. Like it's gotten that crazy. They literally don't know what to do. But with Webpack, you can actually go ahead and write in ES6 modules and output it to common.js. So if you're writing some kind of like logger library or some kind of node library, you can use Webpack to transpile your ES6 modules down into nodes style. So you don't have to worry about that. Then hopefully they'll figure out what the hell to do with the ES6 modules, so that way you'll be able to do that natively at some point and just remove your Webpack transpile step. So kind of cool. Then the other thing you can do is if you are happening to build some kind of library, you can output everything around a certain export key. So if you're building a myAwesomeLogger, then in the output you'll say exports myAwesomeLogger equals, and it'll give you your whole chunk. So whatever you output, you can make like a library out of it. Pretty cool. Exports as the name. So if this was my logger, when I use the target of node, it'll actually export as module that exports equals when myAwesomeLogger. I need to change that slide. But anyway, get the idea. So yeah, you can actually target node with Webpack. Transpiling though with Webpack, I think, is probably the biggest benefit. We already briefly talked about Babel. So you may be in a position at a company where you're stuck in IE8 land, right? How many people IE8 still? Yep, see, right? And you guys are like, I can't do any of this ES6 stuff, you young yippersnappers, because I got to support IE6. Well, that's the awesome part about using Babel and Webpack, is you totally can be doing that right now, which is crazy. So what you can do is use Babel with the presets. You can use TypeScript. You can use CoffeeScript, and just throw a few Babel polyfills in there, and you're good to go in those old browsers. So that's really exciting, and it's extremely exciting from the TC39's perspective too. TC39 is the group that makes JavaScript, right? So they love Babel and they love Webpack and all these tools, because now all of a sudden, when the TC39 is evaluating new JavaScript features, like you guys are looking at this thinking like, is that really JavaScript? What world do we live in? What is all this stuff? Is that a class? What is this thing? Get alerts? This is crazy. So the TC39 is able to take feedback from the community so much faster now, because we can just make these little Babel plugins or TypeScript plugins and start testing them out now and give feedback back to them and be like, yeah, man, decorators, those things kick ass. Those are awesome. I want decorators immediately. So decorators are this little thing. It's a concept that comes from Python. And Yehuda Katz and a couple guys have been working on the spec for decorators. So now, eventually, hopefully, because everything's been able to be tested so well, we'll be able to see decorators come natively to JavaScript. And you can test that stuff right now with Babel and Webpack. So that's really, really cool. And then there's like lots of little, Babel used to be like one big thing with Babel 5, and then in Babel 6, they split it out to like, there's like an infinitely long list of things you can do now, because they want it to not just be only for JavaScript. You could theoretically write a Babel TypeScript plugin if you wanted to. But that preset ES 2015, what that means is it's actually pulling in like 20 other little transforms for the different ES6 features. You can actually pick and choose which ones you want. And there's even different stages of, I don't know if you've ever looked into the TC39 at all, there's different stages of when a feature's being like getting ready to go. It goes like 0 to 5, I think. So 2 is kind of, if it's in 2, it's probably getting in. So you could even go lower. You can go all the way to stage 0 and do like crazy things, like they're even talking about actual static type JavaScript potentially being in the spec. So you could test that now with stage 0. So there's different prefixes to test the stage 0 code and the stage 1 code. It's pretty cool. So let's talk about a few more things you can do with loaders. Not only can you have loaders that just process your code and output it, you can actually do things that happen before your code gets processed. So how many people use JSHint, ESLint, all those things? Great. You should always do that. So you actually can use preloaders that if you want to pass your code through ESLint with Webpack, before your code actually gets bundled, it'll run ESLint. And if it fails, it will not bundle. It will stop the bundling process until you fix your ESLint errors, which I highly recommend. It's a really, really good way to maintain your code standards amongst your team. Really should do that. And then there's lots of different loaders you can put in the pre here. Then for things like post loaders, if you're doing any kind of unit testing and you want to see what kind of code coverage you have, you can use something like Istanbul. And Istanbul kind of creates like a copy of your code and puts instrumentation pieces in it. So that way in your testing, you can see how many lines of code you've tested and all of the ifs and things. So that's another really useful tool. So there's lots of different things you can do with pre and post loaders. Definitely a very useful thing. So one thing you may want to do with Webpack is that you may want to have different bundles for environments. So if I'm in development, I want to use like a source map. I want a source map to output so that I can see where my CoffeeScript or my TypeScript or my ES6, I want to see the originating files. So one way to do that is you can actually have like a webpack.common sort of initial object that contains common options. And then you can have like a webpack.dev and a webpack.prod. And you can require in that common and then just overwrite the bits that you want. So if this is my, this should say .dev here, but anyway, you can pass in like I want my node environment to be development or production. So that way, when you actually run Webpack, you can pass in different environments. So if you're using like continuous integration or something, and you have like a Jenkins server or TeamCity, you can run the prod version of that build in your continuous integration server, and then run the dev versions locally. So that's a really nice thing you can do. And it's going to get even easier with Webpack 2. There's like an env thing that they're going to do in Webpack 2. So yeah, in my development, I may have a node end of development. Production, I would have it here. And then what Webpack does is when it builds it, it replaces this with whatever you had in the key. For some reason, you have to do this JSON.stringify thing in here to do this. I don't know why. When I remove it, it doesn't work. So I just did it and put it in there. But you could also just do like, if you don't want to test based on node end, you can put anything in this define plugin. You could just say prod true or dev true. You can even use this for like feature flags if you wanted. So if there's a certain new component you're working on, a new widget, you could have like, show this widget true or false. And then in here in your code, it would just automatically replace it with that Boolean. So that way you can turn that feature on and off via your Webpack config. It's pretty cool. So for in this case, what I'm saying is that if production equals production is what would happen if I ran my production build. So then it would send all my errors up to Airbreak, which is a really good error service for, you can do it with Node, with client-side JavaScript, with Ruby, all the different things. And then if you are in development mode, it'll actually, after you run the minifying step, it'll just remove that altogether, that little if statement. It'll just run the airbreak.notify. It's pretty cool. Another really cool plugin is the provide plugin. So this kind of goes hand in hand with like having certain modules on every page. So if you know jQuery is on every page and you don't want to say import $sign from jQuery on every page, you can use the provide plugin. And that will automatically make $sign and jQuery here available in every module. So that way you don't have to import jQuery all over the place.
Does that work with ESLint?
You just have to define it as a global still, just like you normally would, which I think you still have to do anyway. But yeah, you just put it in the globals in your ESLint config. Another really cool plugin, I guess this one's a loader technically. This one is called the Inject Loader. So if I did import jQuery and I wanted to do some unit testing around some feature that triggers an AJAX request, in my unit tests, what I can do is I can require and do this inject exclamation mark. So this is how you use loaders without the Webpack config. Like if you wanted to just do that one specific loader, you do it inject loader and then exclamation mark, and then the path to your module. So my login manager in our code, it makes an AJAX request out to our authentication to see if you're logged in. So in my unit tests, I don't really want to actually make that AJAX request, right? Because then that kind of, for one thing, I'm probably not going to be testing on a server where it's running. So how do I test that my login manager will actually receive the right responses? So what I can do is I can go in and I can ask for my login manager, but I'm going to get back this injector function. What the injector function does, I can create a couple of, how many people have used sign-on? Sign-on? Anyone? Good. Sign-on is a wonderful way to create like fake versions of your objects. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little mock of what $.ajax does. So $.ajax, I'm going to say is a stub, and that allows me to create like a fake function. And that fake function returns a done and a fail. And those ones are little spies. Spies are smaller versions of stubs. So these are concepts to unit testing. Check out sign-on. It's super duper easy to use. But now what happens is, for my login manager, what I'm going to do is I got this injector function back. Now I'm going to pass in my fake version of jQuery.ajax for my unit testing. So that way, when I say, I can't remember exactly what it is, but something along the lines of like new login manager.fetch or something. So when I say new login manager.fetch, it's not going to call $.ajax. It's going to call this ajax mocks. And so then I can say expect ajax mock.called once. That's the sign-on API. So it's really, really nice for unit testing. It's one of my favorite little loaders. It's actually really easy to write these plugins too. There was a few weeks ago, I was like working and I have pretty long builds now because there's so much code, and I was like, man, I wish there was a way that I could just figure out when this build is done every time. And so I started Googling, and I found a few kind of ways. I wanted to do like a growl notification up top that says Webpack's done being built. And so I looked and I was like, there's a couple, but they didn't do exactly what I wanted. So I was like, maybe I'll just write my own. So that's what I did. And it's really, really easy to write a Webpack plugin. So all I ended up doing was I created a class called notifier. And basically, you have to have an apply method on your class. Or you could just have a function that has a key of apply in it. And then what you get back as a callback is the actual Webpack compiler instance. And then you can listen for certain types of events. There's like done, there's compile, there's pre-whatevers, there's like thousands of events you can listen to. But the one I care about is like, I want to know when my build is done so that I can post a growl notification to the screen so that I know that I can go look at my page now. Because it sometimes takes, it doesn't take long. I guess I'm being kind of unfair. It's like half a second. But I still wanted to know. Because I might have like gone to Facebook or something and I wanted to see when. Anyway. And what you get back from this is cool. You get that stats thing. That's what you can get all that perf information. You actually get back that object right here. So what I can do is I can say the end time minus the start time, blah, blah, blah. And I can say my Webpack is done. It had no errors, and it took this long. And then you can give it a little message. This is a node package called notifier. It's not a Webpack thing, by the way. So yeah, and I could pull in information from my package JSON. It's really, really cool. So that's how you write a super small and simple Webpack plugin. It's our Twitter image for LP Labs. No, it's fine. So then the way you use this is you import it from wherever you had created that class. So I put it in a Webpack folder, kind of keep all my plugins in one place. And then you just say new notifier in the plugins. So then now every time that Webpack compiles, it says, boop, Webpack is done. It's pretty cool. So there's lots of different things you could do. If you want, one thing that I really want to do, I haven't done it yet though, is like when this thing runs on production, I have this hope and this dream that I can create a plugin that takes that stats object and like puts it into S3 or something. And then I could keep a history of all of my builds and see how like the sizes of it have changed. Because that stats object is like no joke. That thing has every single module ever that you could ever want, all the way down into every node module that you've possibly required. So you could do all kinds of cool static analysis on that thing and figure out like how many modules are not code that I wrote, which is probably like a 1 to 1,000 ratio with NPM, left pad and all that stuff. So you could do really cool things with that. So Webpack 2 is coming, which is really cool. It's actually nice though, because it's not going to change how you work with it a whole lot, because a lot of it's kind of under the covers changes. But I wanted to kind of bring up some of the cool things that they're going to do. You can click on this roadmap thing if you want to go see everything. But they're going to actually have native ES6 module support right now. So right now, the way ES6 module support works is it just transpiles it to common JS syntax. It just says module that exports equals. With 2, it's going to actually support real natives. You wouldn't even have to have Babel in there if you didn't want to do the ES6 modules. So, and like I said, ES6 modules is like the best. That weird require.ensure thing that showed you, that seems really weird right now to use inside of an ES6 module, because obviously like you kind of feel a little weird, like why am I doing require inside of an ES6 module? Well, fortunately, that's going to go away too in Webpack 2, because the system.js spec is going to move into Webpack 2 as well, which is something that JSPM has already had. And if you've not heard of system.js, it's going to be a spec way to load code asynchronously. So you'll be able to say like system.js.load something. I don't know what the syntax is. I haven't used it a whole lot, but it's going to be really nice, because that'll be how Webpack will do the async chunk loading going forward. There's lots of performance enhancements. And this one, who knows what tree shaking is? Because I don't, and I Googled it with Jiffy, which everyone does, and I found this, which made no sense either. So then it turns out that this is actually an incredibly awesome feature that they're going to have in Webpack 2. There's a module that are called Rolla that already had this, but so if I export 2 ES6 module functions, if I export 2 functions inside of a single ES6 module, I've got my function, my other function, and if I only import my other function, right now nothing happens. They both get included in my bundle. But with Webpack 2, what tree shaking does is it's smart enough to realize that, oh wow, you actually only imported my other function. So when it does the bundling, it's just going to not include the my function code. So I guarantee you there's tons of bundles that just export whatever, all the things. And going forward, you won't have to do that. And everything will just kind of be cleaned up by itself, which is pretty cool. So I have a little bit of time. Let's see. I'll show you a few things here. Studio Code. Oh wait, that's the wrong thing. That's what I was learning from Mr. Galloway's talk yesterday. Let's see here. All right. All right, hold a second. All right. How many people use Visual Studio Code? Good. It's so awesome. I can't even like the autocomplete stuff that's built in. I used to do a lot of .NET. I don't do as much of it now. But man, do I miss things like hitting a dot and just figuring out what I can do. Man, it's so nice. So I love Visual Studio Code. Okay. So I've got in this folder, and this is at jQuery898 on GitHub, and then Advanced Webpack. There's a couple fun demos you can go through and look at. This one is that. Look at this stats object. This is what I was going to show you guys. This is what that stats thing does when you export it. So you get all the errors and warnings, what version of Webpack you were using, the hash, all the assets that you had in your output. So this is what my Webpack config looks like. All right, pretty simple. And then it gives you an array of every single module that you used. And this is really simple right now because I'm not doing a whole lot, but how useful could that potentially be? And it actually has the code like stringified in here. So you could even process the actual code through something. It's really neat. Let me show you the Webpack dev server real quick too. We've got like a few minutes. Okay. So how many people use TypeScript? TypeScript? 2, 3 people? One of the cool things that I'm super excited about with TypeScript is that like, I don't know how many people have used it, but the output that it gives you compared to Babel is pretty awesome. Babel gives you outputs with like tons and tons and tons of random functions and all kinds of craziness. So this is I have a TypeScript folder in here. And then inside my TypeScript folder, let's look at the Webpack config. Very simple. I just have a app.ts, and I'm outputting it to the dist with a public path of assets. And then you have to make sure if you're using something that has different file extensions that you tell Webpack that this is how you can use that stuff. And then I just use the TypeScript loader. And that is a thing, npm install ts-loader. Right? And then I have my ts config, standard ts config stuff. Just want to exclude the node modules directory. I've got some typings, and I've got 3 small little modules. And here's my code. Very easy, just three small files. And then in my package.json, I'm going to run the Webpack dev server and show you how cool it is that I can just like be running this stuff. So npm start, ran Webpack. I've got an index.html file in here. And that thing pulls in assets/bundle, which is what this is the public path thing. That's why it's assets. So then, watch this. So then check this out. See this waiting for update signal from WebWDS and hot module replacement? So if I come over here to my code and I want to say, let's see here. All right. I want to actually change. I don't want to see the length of this array. I just want to see the stops. As I did that, it automatically refreshed the page and gave me my stop. And that transpiled the TypeScript and did all that like that fast. Yep.
So are you using that one to transpile the TypeScript file, or are they using the TypeScript compiler?
TypeScript compiler.
Okay.
Yep. So man. Whew. And you can, I mean, imagine, I told you about the React hot loader. You can use the TSX and do React TypeScript stuff. And this is just like the best way to work now. I cannot recommend this enough as a change to your workflow. So I think that's all. I think that's all we'll talk about. I'll leave some time for questions here. Oops, wrong one. Sorry. Too many things. So here's some resources: the Webpack docs, the analyze, Instagram talk. Check that out. Some of the inspiration for this talk is from a blog series I've been doing. Check that out. Some information on tree shaking and the new features in Webpack 2. Thank you.